Okay. Welcome everyone to our Sunday morning forum series here with St. Stephen's Episcopal Church in Birmingham. We're glad you could join us. And also to those, whether you're with us on Zoom webinar or on YouTube, welcome. You are welcome to enter questions and comments in the chat or Q&A on Zoom or the comments on YouTube. I'm happy to introduce our guest presenter for today is Professor Davis Houck. He teaches at Florida State University in Tallahassee, and we are colleagues in the field of rhetoric and communication studies, rhetoric and public address. And so we go back a ways in that and know some people in common that way. And so I used to use some of Davis's books in my classes. Some of the things he's presenting about today, this is a book, Emmett Till and the Mississippi Press, which came out in 2008, which is around the time that I first met Davis and invited him to speak to my civil rights movement class at Stetson University. But he's also the editor with David Dixon of this great book, which is now a 2-volume set, but Rhetoric, Religion, and the Civil Rights Movement, which I have to say, Davis, this book was really important in getting me kind of thinking about the connections between the church and the work of civil rights, and sort of just immersing myself in all of these people's writings and speeches was formative for me. So I thank you for that. And then also another, I know you have more, but these are the 3 I have on my shelf. Also the editor of Women in the Civil Rights Movement as well. And so I've used all of these books in my teaching and research projects as well, and was happy to get the Rhetoric, Religion, and the Civil Rights Movement added to the library at the Seminary of the Southwest. Our church history professor was very excited to learn of Davis's anthology in this work as well. So we are happy to have Davis with us today to present on remembering Emmett Till in and around the Mississippi Delta. Again, we welcome your comments and questions. We'll have a time for those at the end of Davis's presentation. So welcome, Davis.
Thank you, Becky. Appreciate the introduction, and glad to know that I'm making some book royalties, at least many years ago. Yeah, Dave and I had a ball putting those books together because the part of the mission was, according to the series editors, was we want to publish stuff that's never been published before. And so that took us to archives all over the Southeast, and it was a fun project to do. So the last many years I've been working on the Emmett Till case. I travel to the Mississippi Delta at least twice a year, although in the age of COVID, I've been stuck here in Tallahassee. It's a lovely morning as I'm looking out my office window. I wish I could be there with you in Birmingham, but maybe next time. I asked Becky to help me with some PowerPoint slides this morning. And Becky, if you want to cue up the first one, I've got about 20 some slides. I'll talk for about 30 minutes. And I'll take your questions at the end, and we'll do kind of the format. I like to think of this as a little bit of a road trip. So we'll do a little road trip to the Mississippi Delta, mostly in the Mississippi Delta this morning. The first image that you see is one I always like to start with. This is, of course, Emmett and his mom, Mamie Till. And this picture was taken in Christmas 1954. She had just gotten Emmett the new shirt, the new tie. And I think a friend of hers had just gotten a camera for Christmas and brought it over to her apartment in Chicago. And so we have a few images of that day. We don't have a lot of images of Emmett and his mom, but this is one of my favorites. And I always try to return to it because it's easy when you study this case over many years, you kind of begin to see Emmett less as a young 14-year-old boy and more as something kind of less than human. And I always want to try to rehumanize him. And so I like to return to this photograph. What I want to do this morning is kind of do things in maybe 4 parts. The first part is to talk to you a little bit about the history of the case. There's a lot of stuff out there that's not true, that's based on legend, and I'll talk about where that legend comes from. Then we'll talk a little bit about memory, what's going on in Mississippi in the last 15 years related to Emmett Till and his family, and how that's sort of informed by some of the shoddy history that you're going to hear me talk about. Then we'll talk a little bit about, very little about reconciliation, what's happening presently in what a lot of us are trying to get done between different families in the Mississippi Delta that are involved in this case. And then I'll talk a little bit, move from reconciliation to talk just a little bit about what's going on today, because there's some really interesting stuff happening as we speak in Memphis and in Mississippi related to the Till case. So that's a little preview of where we're headed. So slide number 2, Becky, if you would, please. Okay, this guy is named William Bradford Huey. Most of you probably have never heard of him. He was probably the most famous journalist of his day in the mid-50s, and his influence hovers over the Till case in ways that continue to affect the case, that continue to affect in particular how white Mississippians know about Emmett Till. He wrote an article that came out in Look magazine in 1956 that functioned rhetorically as something of a confession. We've learned since that it's a bunch of lies, but because it was in a huge circulation magazine, it continues to affect the memory of Emmett Till today. We'll come back to him in a minute. Next slide, please. Okay, so Emmett jumps on a train in Chicago on August 20th, 1955. He had talked his mom, Mamie Till, into going to visit his cousins who lived in this home in Money, Mississippi. He was going to visit his great uncle and great aunt, Moses Wright and Elizabeth Wright. They sharecropped on 20 acres in Money, and this is their house. The house is no longer there. It was destroyed in a tornado in the 70s. But Emmett showed up here on the 20th. He hated picking cotton. It was cotton picking season. It was incredibly hot. And it was kind of so overwhelming to him that his great aunt at one point kind of pulled him aside and said, Emmett, you're just going to work with me in the house to do chores because you are not made for picking cotton. Next slide, please. Okay, so on August 24th, Emmett and several of his cousins pile into Moses Wright's 1946 Ford. Maurice Wright, Emmett's 16-year-old cousin, Emmett, that would be, Maurice is the Wrights' third youngest son. He's 16. And Moses had told Maurice, do not go up to Money tonight. This was a church night. It was a Wednesday night. You are not to go to downtown Money. Well, of course, they went to downtown Money. They did not have designs on going to this store. Simeon Wright, who was the youngest of the Wright kids, later told me that they were going to a different store, but that store was closed. So they ended up going to this store in downtown Money. There was a checkers game going on outside the store, so they kind of huddled around. We don't know exactly what happened next, but we think what happened is Emmett may have been dared to go in. Emmett was a big talker, a loud kid, brash kid, confident kid, single child. And we know that he went into the store by himself, whether he went in there on a dare to flirt with the pretty girl inside. Suffice it to say, he went in, he comes back out, and he stands at the door there and he whistles at Carolyn Bryant, who's the 21-year-old shopkeeper. She's in the store by herself, or actually her sister-in-law's in the back taking care of her kids, two very young kids. And what happens when Emmett lets out this wolf whistle, everybody hears it and they're terrified because Emmett has hit the tripwire of race relations in Jim Crow, Mississippi. And his cousins are so terrified that everybody immediately jumps in the car as fast as they can because she's coming out to get a pistol. Her car is parked to the left of the store. And somebody heard her say, I'm going to get a pistol, because she felt threatened. And so they jump back in the Ford and off they go as fast as they can, headed 3 miles home in East Money. And this sets into motion what will happen over the next couple of days. So keep in mind, this is Wednesday, August 24th in the evening when this happens. Next slide, please. So Emmett on the 28th is kidnapped. It's 2 a.m. 2 men come to the house, at least 2 men, we think more, but at least 2 that we can identify, come to the house. they kidnap Emmett essentially under, they have guns and flashlights, and they want the boy who did the talking and money, their words. And they eventually come to a bedroom where Emmett is sleeping with his cousin Simeon. They're in the same bed, and they pull him out of bed, and off they go. Moses Wright and Elizabeth Wright are begging with the two men to please, just give him a whipping in the yard. If he did anything wrong with you, we'll pay you money. Please don't take him. He's from Chicago. He doesn't know any better. At which point, J.W. Milam, who's really the protagonist in this, 6'2", 230-pound Army veteran, and by all accounts a bully, who loved to bully Black people, basically told Moses Wright, if you want to live to see 65, preacher, Moses Wright preached part-time. If you want to live to see 65, preacher, you will not tell anybody about what's happening here tonight. So that's the last time Emmett's family sees him alive, is 2 a.m. when he's taken out of the Wright house. The reason I'm showing you this picture is this is a ring. LT is Lewis Till, Emmett's father. And when Emmett went to Chicago, one of the things he took with him was this signet ring. It kind of finally fit on his finger. And he was showing it off to his cousins because he thought it was pretty cool to be wearing this ring from his father. When Emmett's body was discovered in the river on August 31st, so the 28th is a Sunday when he's kidnapped. 3 days later, a fisherman finds his body. Legs are sticking up out of the Tallahassee River. And they pull his body to shore, and they pull this awful looking thing. They got it in a boat, but they eventually dump the body on the shore, and it's horribly disfigured. It's bloated. It's been 3 days in a very hot river. Moses Wright is called to the riverside to come to see if this is the missing boy that they're looking for. And the first thing that Moses Wright says is, I don't know that that's my nephew. But he's able to make an identification eventually later that morning based on this ring. His boys had told him, is he wearing a ring? And he was. So this was the way that Moses Wright identifies his nephew. That's how badly decomposed the corpse is. Next slide, please. They're going to have a funeral for Emmett in Money. This is where they were going to have the funeral. They found the body the morning of the 31st. By the afternoon, they're going to put it in the ground. Mamie Till gets word of this back up in Chicago. And keep in mind, trying to communicate is really hard. It's just because there's hardly any phones in Mississippi at this time. But word gets back to the people in Chicago, the Wright family, do not bury Emmett in Money. He is to be shipped back home to Chicago. And the reason we're talking about the case today is because of what she did when the corpse got back home. Next slide, please. So this is from, I believe it's September 3rd, 1955, and you can't quite see Emmett down in the lower left there. He's in a casket. When the body came back to Chicago, it was in a sealed box, and the box was not to be opened. And Mamie Till tells the funeral owner, Arthur Rayner, you will open the box. I need to see what's in the box. He eventually allows her to see the corpse, and she can't identify it either initially. She goes through this very slow process of working from toe to head to try to identify, is this my son? She eventually, yep, this is my son. And at this point, she's not only horrifically sad, she's also mad. She is really, really angry about what has happened to her child. And so what she does is she invites the photographers in, the Black photographers who are with the Black press, and said, go ahead, take the pictures. I want the world to see what Mississippi has done to my child, because there's no words that I'm going to be able to use that's going to describe this horrific corpse. And I don't show the image just because I don't want to traumatize anybody. If you want to find the image, they're out there. But I just don't like to show the images to my students, to people I'm lecturing to, but you can find it. But she put the body then on display for all of Chicago. So for 3 days, you see the line. Thousands and thousands, we think up to 50,000 people just walk by the corpse. So she put the corpse on display in Chicago, and a Black Chicago turned out for it. Next slide, please. The two men are arrested. Moses Wright went to the police and identified Roy Bryant, who's there on the left, and his wife is Carolyn Bryant, who's there on the right, the woman that Emmett whistled at. This is the first day of the trial, which is September 19th. So yeah, justice is moving really quickly in Mississippi, just a couple of weeks. And I didn't realize this when I started my research on the case, but you could bring your kids into a courtroom in Mississippi and you see, again, the rhetorical function of this is surely this handsome guy on the left with his two cute kids wasn't a child murderer, right? That he's a doting father. And so he would never do something like this. So yeah, part of the framing of them as a couple, as a family, right, is right out of Hollywood, the cute little boys. And surely Roy Bryant wouldn't do anything like this. But this is the first day of the trial. Next slide, please. This is the 12 jurors, all white men. Women were not allowed to serve on juries. And of course, black men were not allowed on juries by virtue of the fact that there were no registered black voters in Tallahassee County, Mississippi. And so these are the 12 men. They heard the evidence, and Mamie Till knew they were going to acquit regardless of the evidence, because there's no way white Mississippi is going to convict two accused white men of killing a 14-year-old black child who whistled or flirted or did something he shouldn't have done with a white woman. And so she wasn't even in the courtroom when they read the verdict on Friday, September 23rd. The verdict came down in 67 minutes. So they didn't adjudicate too long. Next slide, please. So what actually happened? This takes us back to William Bradford Huey, who wanted to write kind of the definitive history of what did Emmett Till do on the 24th and what happened to him on the 28th. And so this is the cover of the January 24th, 1956 Look magazine. And you see the title of the article that Huey publishes is called The Shocking Story of a Proved Killing in Mississippi. And it's online. You can read it. I would encourage you to read it, because the version that the two men give of Emmett Till is he's not afraid. He's still a bully. He wants to have sex with white women. And we know all this is nonsense. It's all a lie told by the two killers. And the reason they're telling these lies is because it's not just the two of them who were involved in the kidnap and murder. We think there were upwards of 10. And a couple of them were family members. And so they are telling this crazy tale of this would-be rapist 14-year-old boy from Chicago to essentially protect themselves and protect family members. Functions as a confession. And so a lot of people read this and were like, oh, well, we have the confession of the killers, right? No, we don't. But you would be amazed at how many, if you go into Mississippi, go into the Delta, ask somebody, a white person, if they know about the Till case. Yep. Oh, he almost raped Carolyn Bryant in the Bryant store. And they shot him on the banks of the Tallahatchie River, right? It's like, no, that's not. But it's coming straight out of William Bradford Huey. That's where they're getting that version of the story. Next slide, please. This guy they don't talk about, Willie Reed. Willie Reed, for me, is the hero of this case in terms of the trial. He is our only eyewitness. He was there the morning that the men showed up in the pickup truck with Emmett in the back. He was walking to a country store at 7 in the morning. It was a church day. And he sees this terrified kid on the back of the truck. Later, he's walking by this road that goes right by this barn where the truck is pulled next to, and he hears a kid screaming. And it's clear the kid is being beaten. He's being beaten so badly that Willie Reed goes to a neighbor and just says, hey, are you hearing the same thing that I'm hearing? And later, of course, the cries quit, the cries diminish and eventually stop. Truck is pulled into this shed, and we think at that point Emmett's body is loaded into the back of a pickup truck. So Willie Reed actually testifies at the trial, and he didn't have to. He's 18 years old. He could have, like a lot of people that morning, pretended, you know what, it's not my fight. I want to continue to live in Mississippi. I don't want white people angry with me. Because what happened is immediately after he testified, they had to get him out to Chicago. His life was in grave danger. and he died just a couple of years ago, but he remains for me just so brave. And he didn't have to be, but as he said, I had to tell the world what I saw that morning. Next slide, please. This is where the murder actually happened. You see where the truck is, and right behind that truck is a little door, and that's the seed barn where they took Emmett that morning. Because, and this was actually a plantation where J.W. Milam and Roy Bryant, who are half brothers, J.W. Milam's full brother, Leslie Milam, lived on this plantation. And they wanted to be out where they thought nobody would hear them because they were going to beat this kid. And they wanted a place to do that at 6 a.m. Sunday where nobody would hear them or nobody would see them. Well, they miscalculated. But that's the place. This is in Drew, Mississippi, Sunflower County, about 50 minutes from where Emmett was taken in Money. So there's some pretty serious travel to get from Money all the way up to Drew on this plantation. Next slide, please. Okay, so that kind of concludes a real brief history of the case and sort of the contested histories and the contested memories. We now have a couple museums dedicated to Emmett Till in the Mississippi Delta. This is one of them in Glendora. It's super, what I would call vernacular. It doesn't have a lot of money. You can kind of see this is kind of hand painted. It's run by the mayor of Glendora, Johnny B. Thomas, and it presents its own history of the case, but I wanted to show you kind of at least the outside, the facade of one of the museums. Next slide, please. In 2005, the memorialization of Emmett Till really started. So the previous slide, that was 2007 when that museum opened up. In 2005, so for 50 years, Emmett Till is not on the landscape in the Mississippi Delta. This is the very first sign erected just outside of Leflore County, where there's a 30-mile stretch of Highway 49 called the Emmett Till Memorial Highway. And this was amazing, right? 50 years, his family was there at the unveiling, and pretty much immediately after this sign was unveiled, somebody spray painted KKK on it. And we kind of knew that this was likely to happen because a lot of white Mississippians did not want Emmett Till on their landscape physically. They thought for 50 years, we didn't have him, so why are y'all bringing him back? But I wanted you to see this sign. This is number one in terms of the chronology here. Next slide. This is what's left of the Bryant Grocery and Meat Market. And this slide, so this is where Emmett whistled at Carolyn Bryant. The store is privately owned. A bunch of us have been trying to buy it for years. The family won't sell it to us. Eventually, we will have a redone Bryant's Grocery and Meat Market, and it'll serve as a museum. Where that'll be, I don't know. This is downtown Money, what's left of it. And there's literally, a couple dozen people who live in Money. The state of Mississippi, though, to their credit, put this sign up, and this was their very first Mississippi Freedom Trail marker. It was put out in front of the store in 2011, and then the next slide should give you a close-up of the sign. So, right, it talks about 14-year-old Emmett Till came to this site to buy candy, which is true. White shopkeeper Carolyn Bryant accused the black youth of flirting with her, and shortly thereafter, Till was abducted by Bryant's husband and his half-brother. True. Till's tortured body was later found. True. The two men were tried and acquitted. True. But later sold their murder confession to Look magazine. You see what's going on here. The creators of the sign are buying into the William Bradford Huey narrative of what happened, right? That the men confessed. It was just the two of them who, tried to beat some sense into Emmett Till, and he still wanted to be with white women. So even this very prominent marker is infused with the Huey narrative. That's how dominant it is, and I wanted you to see that. Next slide. Well, so the KKK defaced one sign. This is the kind of the infamous river site sign. This is where Emmett's body was taken out of the river. By the way, you won't see this, and I think he'll deny it to this day. The guy who funded these signs was Morgan Freeman back in 2007. He lives not far from here, and he grew up here. And this sign is very, very rural. You see to the right, the dirt road. It's about 3 miles from downtown Glendora, and this is all just plantation land. And this is the third sign. The first one had been shot up. The second one had been pulled out and thrown in the river, we think. This is the third one, and right, you see the bullet holes. Next slide. This is the fourth sign. It was donated. It is made out of some sort of crazy composite materials that you can't deface it, supposedly. To the left in a tree is a camera that is doing surveillance 24/7. So we'll see what becomes of this sign. But this sign got a lot of press when it was finally sunk into the ground. I think it was 2 years ago. It's still there. Right now, what's happening, which is really cool at this Grayball Landing site, you're going to be hearing about this, is this site is being turned into a park. And it's going to be a 2-acre park. A lot of money is involved. And it's just going to be a really, really, really neat space that one day, if you're in the Mississippi Delta, you got to stop and see. You'll be hearing more about this. Next slide. Part of the money that's been infused into the Mississippi Delta is the courtroom. So this is the very courtroom where the trial was held in 1955. It's still an active courtroom. Mississippi, through some federal earmarks, got the money to redo the courthouse. I think it was $3 million. And they redid it exactly like it was in 1955. It's beautiful. And I got to be in the courthouse when it was opened back in 2014 for the first time to the public. And if you're there in the Mississippi Delta, if you're there this is Sumner, Mississippi in Tallahassee County, this is one of the first sites you will see. It's open to the public. It's still, like I said, a functioning courthouse. But it's a very, very powerful place because it is meant to replicate down to the last detail what the courthouse looked like in 1955. But again, heavy investment on the part of the federal government coming into the state of Mississippi. You're starting to see a thread here of maybe some civil rights tourism. Yeah, exactly. Next slide. This is the barn where Emmett was murdered. It's on private property, just north of Drew, Mississippi. I'm pretty good friends with the owner, and he lets me come out and photograph it and bring classes and bring students and bring locals. He knows exactly what he has. And to his eternal credit, when he bought the place in 1994, he did not bulldoze this. He could have. And I think a lot of white Mississippians would have bulldozed it because people like me want to know about it. People like me want to see it. And like I said, he's just really, really gracious. There's no signs. Whether there will be a sign one day remains to be seen. Whether he will sell this place to a federal entity remains to be seen. But he's just a really sweet man who's been really gracious to me and my friends to allow us to take people out to this very, very rural kind of sacred place. If you think that Emmett Till was the spark that started the civil rights movement, and a lot of people make this claim, here's your ground zero. This is where it starts. Next slide. This is what's left of the Money, Mississippi, the East Money, Mississippi Church of God in Christ. This is where Moses Wright was a preacher. There's talk of redoing this church to make it, again, a landmark. Whether that happens remains to be seen. This is Leflore County, and Leflore County is not as amenable to memory projects as Tallahatchie County is. And so much of what's going on is really a county by county thing, which is sort of interesting. The local politics are pretty intense, as you might imagine. But this is what's left. The picture of the graveyard that I showed a little bit earlier, it would be further to your left. But this is, unfortunately, this is so much of Mississippi on the landscape, what you see. But this is where Moses Wright preached. Next slide. Funny story here, and I don't have a lot of time to tell it, but this is 15-year-old Carolyn Bryant. We found this picture of her, and there's not a lot of pictures of her. This was in a yearbook, Indianola High School yearbook. This is her sophomore year. A friend and I found it in this eatery had Indianola High School yearbooks. And really long story short, this is in the 1950-51 yearbook. And Carolyn Bryant is still with us. She's 86. Her sister Charlotte, who I've gotten to know, just died this past week. She was 88 and a really, really sweet woman. But pretty much the only person involved in the case who's still alive is Carolyn Bryant, who lives with her family up in North Carolina. Next slide. So this is where Roy Bryant is buried. I wanted to show you this. And we know where kind of all the major principals are buried around the Delta. I took my students and photographed this back in 2017. You see the red, whatever that red thing is. Somebody kind of perennially defaces this gravestone. This would be blood, right? This is what that would signify. And sometimes you will see kind of scratched in killer of Emmett Till. So whoever does this, I don't know, but continues to remind people, Roy Bryant, even in death, we know where you're buried and we know what you did. So just kind of an interesting little piece of local history here. Next slide. This is me on the left, and the guy on the right is Simeon Wright, who was in the bed with Emmett the night that he was 12 and he was taken. And Simeon became really the spokesperson for the family. If you were doing any Emmett Till projects, you were going to work with Simeon. Unfortunately, in 2017, Simeon passed from cancer. So I was fortunate to, in 2014, spend a whole day with him. And we were photographed here right in front of the Bryant Grocery and Meat Market. And while we were doing that same day, same trip, and this is really the last slide, Becky, if you want to show, I'm really not supposed to show this slide. The woman on the left has always told me, do not share on social media this slide. And I've always respected her wishes. This is Marionette Morgan. Her grandfather was on the jury. And her family owns the Bryant Grocery and Meat Market. To her credit, she has tried to turn a site next to the grocery store, what's left of it, a gas station, into kind of a memorial it's kind of a toe in the water for her family. And so she got a big grant. She redid it's called Benroy's gas station. And on this day in 2014, she's showing us the redesigned Benroy's. And Simeon is in the store listening, and I'm thinking, I'm scheming the whole time this is happening, thinking, I want to get a picture of Simeon and Marionette, because there's been no reconciliation. Families have never talked to each other. They've just been embittered. But Simeon has said very publicly, I forgive that family, and I am willing to do any reconciliation work that they're willing to do. So when we're headed out the door of Benroy's on this day, on this hot day in July, I said, I'm going to figure out how to get Simeon and Marionette together and stopped and get a picture. And so as soon as they were in this kind of the same frame, I said, can I get a picture of you two? And Simeon knew exactly what I was doing. And Simeon says, and I'll never forget it, we're making some history right here. And they were, because these are the two white family, black family who never talked to each other and yet share this kind of awful past that has never left them. And I believe that kind of ends, I'm a little bit over time, but I believe that takes us to the close and where we are today. And this is where I'll kind of stop talking and take your questions, is we're getting the very first Emmett Till movie. It's being made in Mississippi and Memphis as we speak. It will be a 6-part ABC docudrama that will air probably at the end of 21 or early 22, 6 parts. So, I mean, this is going to be serious, and we don't know if it's going to be ABC or Netflix, but it's big budget, big actors, big actresses, big directors. I know this because Devery Anderson's book is the foundation for the screenplay, and Devery's he's still in Mississippi, and he was a juror this past week. So he got to actually participate in the filming. He said it's going to knock you out. But here we are almost 66 years on, and we still haven't had an Emmett Till film, but right. we're getting one.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. That is a good heads up about the film. I think that would be worth viewing. I used to show documentaries to my students that addressed, the role of the Emmett Till case and the photographs. Emmett was good to not share the photographs because you kind of have to have a trigger warning if you show the photographs of Emmett in his casket because they're that disturbing. You can easily find them by doing a search in your favorite search engine, Emmett Till Jet magazine. And when I did so just now, it comes up with a Time magazine article that talks about how these photos changed the civil rights movement, as many people believe. And Brian Stevenson, who actually spoke here at St. Stephen's a few years ago, and we had someone from EJI last week representing that organization, what Brian Stevenson said of the photos of Emmett Till: without the images, no one would be prepared to believe the violence we've witnessed. That image still has resonance. It still has power. I think it still expresses the pain and anguish of a huge part of our population that is still hoping for basic recognition of their humanity. This happened, in the 1950s at a key point. And so that's why people give, this case a lot of credit, because the horror of what happened to this 14-year-old really, it's drove home why we need a civil rights movement and why it needed, there was already a civil rights movement, but why it needed to gain momentum to make change. So I showed documentaries in some of my classes that did show the image. And I want to tell you, Davis, that one of the students who was there in that class when you came and talked about Emmett in the semester we read one of the books about him, she did get in touch with me last summer because we're Facebook friends, Erica. And she said to me, she's like, I want you to know that everything we learned about Emmett Till helps me to understand the significance of what was going on, especially in summer 2020 with Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd. And she's like, and I was able to tell my husband, who had not learned that history, about, when people were referring a lot to Emmett Till in the news in 2020. So I think it's good to revisit this history as you have and sort of its ongoing significance for sure.
Thank you.
If people have particular comments or questions you would like Professor Houck to address in our last few minutes, he'd be happy to take those questions or comments. It was really powerful to see the representatives of the two families together.
Thanks. Yeah, no, it's one of my most treasured photographs. Yeah.
And that's why, we're doing this as a Lent series, that focus on reconciliation. And for us, what is our role as, Christians and members of the church if we're supposed to have a ministry of reconciliation entrusted to us?
One of the things I didn't get to talk about, I just didn't have time for it, was in 2007, Tallahassee County apologized to the Till family. So it was this very public act of reconciliation that took a lot of work between whites and blacks. It was 9 whites, 9 blacks serving on this commission. And they did it, and it took some time. And my colleague, Dave Tell at the University of Kansas, has documented how they did it. But they did it, and they did it on the courthouse square. It was very powerful.
Do you have a question in the Q&A? You can see that, Davis, if you want to address that.
Here. Seems to indicate that black children are viewed as older and more sexualized than their white peers, that they haven't made much progress. Yeah, Emmett was depicted credibly in 1955 as this sort of marauding, womanizing, which is absurd. He was 14 and knew nothing to speak of about girls or relationships. And the idea that he becomes a black predator is right. It stretches credulity, let's just say. But white America was willing to believe it.
Yeah. There is a YouTube comment that I will share with you. Melinda shares great news about the film. It seems that the state of Mississippi has not yet made efforts to show remorse for the horror around Emmett Till's murder, but uses federal monies to enhance tourism. What is your response to that, Davis?
She's right. Mississippi as a state has certainly not come forward and apologized, but yeah, they're willing to capitalize on the tourism that's coming, and it is coming. When this film hits, I think we're going to get a lot of tourism, and who knows, maybe that will bring the state of Mississippi into some sort of conversation with the Till family. That's me being an optimist. We'll see.
So next week, as you know, Davis, and as people who looked at the schedule, we have Patrick Weems and Benjamin Salisbury from the Emmett Till Interpretive Center who will
I did
be
not
with
know
us.
that. Great.
Yeah. So this was a purposeful back-to-back presentations. So, they're going to talk about what Davis has talked about today, but how in their community in Sumner, Mississippi, in the Delta, how do they grapple with the memory of this and do the work of racial reconciliation in their community as the people who are actually there with the legacy of this living on. But I was wondering if you could share for a moment, Davis, I know that you take students from FSU there. I know that you've had grad students, and I know you've worked with Keith Beecham, the filmmaker. Like, talk about some of the kind of more outreach oriented things that have come out of your research.
Yeah. So one of the things that we just got kind of in place 2 weeks ago was we are going to be bringing filmmakers into Tallahassee County, trained by Florida State. And we're going to be doing filmmakers workshop with local kids through the high schools to teach them how to be filmmakers, to teach them how to tell stories. And then an endowment I've helped create here at Florida State will fund a competition in the West Tallahatchie High School, which is an Emmett Till contest, which will start at this fall, which is storytelling. And we want to do it across media. We don't want to write an essay. I mean, if you want to write an essay, that's fine, but poetry, music, film. And to get students who live in that county or going to school in that county, who live with Emmett Till on their landscape every day, thinking about creative ways of presenting what Emmett Till means to them in 2021 and beyond. So I am super excited. I'm working with a guy by the name of Jermaine Hampton. Jermaine teaches social studies, got us in the school board meeting, and the school board said, yeah, let's do it. I didn't anticipate it was going to move this quickly. But they'll be using the archives at Florida State University. I'll put a plug in here. The only archive dedicated to Emmett Till scholarship in the world is at Florida State University. And I helped create it along with colleagues Devery Anderson, who I mentioned a little bit earlier, and the filmmaker Keith Beauchamp. And now we have more collections. Every year we get a few more, and we're digitizing those collections. We're sharing them with the world, and just really excited about what's coming, because we at Florida State want to share these collections with larger publics so that we can do the work of the next generation, especially K-12, building curriculum around it. And so, yeah, I'm excited about what's coming.
Excellent. Yeah, no, it's a great resource. I mean, how can we, continue to engage with this history and to think about like, how do we grapple with the public memory and kind of move forward, but yet always kind of being aware of where we've been. And I know that.
And I'll just put one exclamation point on that public memory project. William Bradford Huey's narrative hovers over this story, and it's still just super real in Mississippi and elsewhere. That as my colleague Dave Till likes to say, who's Emmett Till do you believe in? Is it Willie Reed's? Is it Mamie Till's? Or is it William Bradford Huey? And who Emmett Till is matters enormously when you go to Mississippi, when you go to the Delta, and you talk to people, because I like to engage people about this history. And it, it's super interesting to me to find out what version of Emmett Till they believe, and then where they got that version.
Right, for sure. Yeah. So as we wrap up, we have one last question. Melinda was wondering, have church communities sought to help reconciliation around Emmett Till's death? Like, has there been any connection with any churches in the Delta or in Mississippi that you know of?
Not that I know of, but that's not to say it hasn't happened. But this is a good Patrick and Ben question for next week.
Okay.
Because they would know, especially in Tallahatchie County, because Patrick in particular he was the executive director of the Emmett Till Memorial Commission. So that apology that happened in 2007, he was one of the architects that was working with that committee. So he'll have a lot to say next week about how that happened.
And I would say in Memphis, at least, it's the faith communities that have come together to retell and rename some of the kind of public memory projects. At Calvary Episcopal Church in downtown Memphis, it's on with one of the slave auction blocks, and they've done a service where they read the names of all of the people and the ages that were sold at that intersection. And I believe that's in I can't remember the book that's coming out that's just been written about the devil's bones or something like that. But where a lot of that work is mentioned, that was just a couple years ago. The lynching site. I mean, so there are faith communities, within the South that are helping to lead some of those conversations. I'm sure it's not exclusive, but I think it's impossible to ignore the parallel that, as Christians, we're gathered because someone threatened society and was lynched and left there, and it was such a powerful, haunting image. That it transformed Western thought and is why we're gathered today. So I think it's impossible not to make the parallels.
I appreciate that.
Right. And I think that, was it James Cone? I think that theologian has a book with is something Christ and the Lynching Tree or something like that. I should know the exact title, but his work's so important in terms of liberation theology and all. And I know John has to move on to our service, but I want to kind of wrap things up, and I'll be out there soon myself. But and
let me, John, thank you. I just want to say to everybody real quick, and I started to cut you off. If you want to be in touch with me, because if you got questions and you just didn't want to ask them here, please reach out to me, dhouck@fsu.edu, dhouck@fsu.edu. I'd love to hear from you. Love to hear your questions, your comments, your connections, because always somebody knows somebody in Mississippi who knows. So in this case never ends. So yeah, be in touch.
That's right. Yes, for sure. And if you all, need to get in touch with Davis, I can always pass along his contact info to you as well. Actually, it turns out that Patrick Weems, who will be one of our speakers next week, self-identifies as Episcopalian. So he's sort of in our fold. And my neighbor in Austin at the seminary, Philip Parker, his first job out of seminary was at the Episcopal Church there in Sumner. And so he was able to get to know Patrick a little when he was there. Yeah. So, and I think that, my sense of the Bishop of Mississippi and that diocese is that I don't know the specifics, but I suspect that they have some reconciliation, and we have some good things going on here in the Diocese of Alabama. We have a Jonathan Daniels pilgrimage, and so which is a big annual thing here. It's been virtual lately, but
I'd love to go up to Hayneville and see some of those places where his story gets told.
For sure. It's an important part of our story, and certainly here in Birmingham, there's still a lot of public memory work and the work of repentance and reconciliation as far as our history on race. And so that's what we're trying to do here in the season of Lent, is just kind of reflect on these things and kind of add to what we know, as we continue to reflect.
As Patrick says, Patrick will say this next week, and so I don't want to preempt him, but I want to foreground one of the things that he says, which I think is so powerful, which is we can't do reconciliation until we have an accurate history.
That's right.
And that gets in the way of the Till case in so many places in Mississippi, because so many people are attached to their version of Emmett Till. And so until we have that accurate history, it's really just hard to do forgiveness and coming together and really understanding what happened.
Yes, no, that makes sense. And I don't know, for me, I didn't learn about Emmett Till until after I was in graduate school, to be honest with you. It was never in my curriculum. So we're always learning. We can always continue to add to our learning. I commend to you all who want to know more. Look up some of the things that Davis and his colleagues have written. He mentioned the filmmaker Keith Beauchamp. He has excellent work as well. And I look forward to the documentary you mentioned, and Devery Anderson's book are all good places to start. And so maybe we'll have some discussions once the film is out. Maybe it'll be a good time for us to revisit the topic.
We'd love to.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining with us in our Sunday forum today. Thank you, Davis, for sharing your time with us, especially on this morning when we had to spring forward. So it felt a little earlier than it really was.
You're welcome. Glad to do it. Appreciate